In this video, we're talking about...
Last time at the first debate, we had millions of people fact-checking.
Our goal is to offer a platform for all ideas.
You know what? I'm about to say it.
So whenever somebody interrupts me, I'll be like, wait, I was talking. Do not interrupt me.
I'd rather not say, but the answer is yes.
Welcome to Hanging on His Words. My name is Ken Heidebrecht. I am the host here at Hanging on His Words, and you're watching Season 3 of Honor of Kings, a show that I do with my brother and in-house scholar, Sean Griffin. How's it going, brother?
Hey, Ken. How you doing? Good to see you this week. Thank you for joining me again to do this awesome deep dive into a book that's no longer is in our Bible.
Yes, it no longer is in our Bible. And this is a common theme that we're witnessing in this show, is that there are books that are no longer in our Bibles or were never put in our Bibles, yet they tend to be in other canons throughout the world. And it's interesting because when we start to look into why these books were removed or just were never added to begin with, we start to see that there's some malicious intent behind the removal, or even just some plain ignorance regarding the storyline, I guess, of what we would call classically the 66 books of the Protestant canon. Would you agree?
Yeah. It's funny that some of the reasoning we've found that some of these books were taken out of the American Bible was ludicrous. Like it's not scholarly based, it's not theologically based. It's just simply men who either don't like a book or don't understand a book, yet they were somehow in a position of making this decision, which just blows me away, and so then they had access to publishers over 100 years ago who started publishing new Bibles without these books in them. And so then we just get this revisionist history that's slowly creeping up on the body of believers. And now the literature that they had once available to them for thousands of years is suddenly being minimized. And then therefore all these questions are being created. And as a result of that, you have a lot of confusion, a lot of fighting, and then there's all these denominations that spring up out of this confusion because people are working with, partial information.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's the enemy doing what he does best, and it's dividing and conquering as best that he can. And unfortunately, we're seeing not only malicious intent with the removal of some of these books, but the overall agenda for removing the books is due to men who do not want content that's in those books regarding the Son of Man, regarding certain concepts like the priesthood of our Messiah being known and taught throughout the body of believers. So it's very fascinating, and the more that we peel back layers, the more we see that it's not just simple ignorance. It's not just someone thinking, I don't know if I like this book, or I don't quite understand it. It's that they do understand it, yet they have their own agenda to make sure that other people aren't buying into what those books are saying.
Yeah, and today the book of Susanna that we're going to take a peek at, this is a unique one because this was actually has a long-standing history that we're going to talk about during this episode, and the descendants of the very people who lived and wrote this book rejected it, and that's the Pharisees of Judaism, because they have a very strong bias against Daniel, and Daniel is a highlighted character in this book as it lines up with his time in Babylon and some of the events that took on there. So it's very interesting because, you know, as you know, the book of Daniel is, you know, wonderfully prophesying about our Messiah. And of course, Pharisaic Judaism rejects the Messiah. So it's very unique. But Ken, do you want to let people know, in case they've never seen this show before? Because this is season 3, and we're already into episode 7 this season. But would you like to let them know what this whole show is about, in case you've never seen it?
Yeah, absolutely. The premise is simple. Sean and I, we've taken books that we are putting on screen and reviewing for you guys, and we've studied them. We've corresponded with each other, with other believers who have been interested in these books, and have tested them to see if the validity of what they claim is true to what we would call the 66 books in our Western Protestant canon. And we go sometimes line by line, depending on which book we're going. Like tonight, we will be. In other instances, we've picked and choose certain chapters out of larger books and put that forward for your consideration. And we've had a really good time doing it. I know it's blessed other people. And so that's essentially what we do in a nutshell here at Honor of Kings. We test the books to what we know to be the Bible, or what we've grown up to know as the Bible. And in the Western world, here in Canada and in the United States and other countries, it's been the 66 book Protestant canon. Now, we don't claim that that is the only scriptures that are authoritative and teach good doctrine, which is also why we do this show. We looked at other books throughout all of history that have been in other canons, and we see what it is that they teach, and we see why they were removed. And at the end of the day, we like to come to a conclusion as to whether or not these can be considered scripture, or there was a good reason for why they were removed in the first place.
Yeah, one of our first tests that we apply to these concepts is to see is there prophecy in these books. Now, not all of them have actual prophecy in them. But if there is a prophecy in there, then it starts to feel like, is this something that we can see that was intended to come true already or not? If it's a prophecy that lines up with other prophets in the American Canon of 66, where sometimes the timeline of that prophecy is still in the future. And so, you know, therefore we have to gauge the validity of what that prophecy is saying in comparison to all the other prophets like Ezekiel, Isaiah, Zechariah, Amos, those guys, if they're prophesying the same concept. But if there's no prophecy in it, then we have to look at what is it actually theologically teaching? Is it teaching, you know, just like the twofold test in Deuteronomy 13 about a dreamer of dreams or, you know, a false prophet? Is he leading someone toward the covenant of Yahweh, which means the commandments of God? And if they're prophesying something that doesn't come true, then obviously they're a false prophet as well. So this is like the twofold test. So Ken, I don't think this book specifically has any prophecy in it because it's a short book that we're going to cover. But at the same time, we're gonna hold up its theological teachings inside of it to the canon of 66 for everyone to see. So
Right, exactly.
this is the book of Susanna. Now, Ken, I just threw this up just as an introduction to this book for a lot of people, in case you didn't know. It just this is very common information that all scholars agree on for this book. It's just it was translated from Hebrew into the Greek and was made part of the Septuagint in approximately 250 BC. That's when we get the first version of a Septuagint, about 250 years before the days of Yeshua. And it was made canon by the Roman Catholics, but it was considered apocryphal by Protestants. And then the rabbinical Judaism, like we already talked about, they do not recognize it in their canon because they have a bias towards Daniel, and Daniel's mentioned in this book. And then also some translations of the Septuagint included Susanna as the actual 13th chapter of Daniel. So you could see why the rabbinical Pharisees would want to discard this book, you know, along with their bias towards Daniel. So
That's right. So it's in many canons, minus Judaism's, and you know, the early Protestant canon, as it's written there on the screen, it was considered apocryphal. Now it's not even part of the Protestant canon whatsoever. But
okay, so here we got in the first 7 verses here of Susanna. It says, there was a man living in Babylon. His name was Jehoiakim. He took a wife named Susanna, the daughter of Hilkiah, a very beautiful woman, and one who feared the Lord. Her parents were righteous and had taught their daughter according to the law of Moses. Jehoiakim was very rich and had a spacious garden adjoining his house. And the Jews used to come to him because he was the most honored of them all. In that year, 2 elders from the people were appointed as judges. Concerning them, the Lord had said, iniquity came forth from Babylon, from elders who were judges, who were supposed to govern the people. These men were frequently at Jehoiakim's house, and all who had suits at law came to them. When the people departed at noon, Susanna would go into her husband's garden to walk.
All right. So we're introduced right away to characters here. One is the name of Jehoiakim, and he is the husband of one of the main characters here, Susanna. And apparently she's a good-looking woman, Sean.
Yeah, and it talks about this multiple times throughout this book, that she is striking. You know, she's a beautiful woman. And then this is actually what causes the problem in the story.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And her parents, I want to highlight, were righteous, which links that word to the law of Moses, because they taught their daughter according to the law of Moses. So if you're keeping the law of Moses and you're teaching it in your household, apparently that's a righteous thing to do.
Yeah. And this is where I think it's funny. And I love books like this because it really helps dispel this modern mainstream doctrine you hear, passed around in a lot of modern churches, where they say, well, you can't be righteous. You need the righteousness of Jesus. And I'm like, that's taken out of context. You can do right behavior. And that's what Paul is trying to explain to us in Romans chapter 10, 1-4, is that the law of Moses does teach you right behavior, but the righteousness that you receive at the resurrection, when you get your glorified body, that's like a, perfected right behavior. So that's righteousness you receive from Christ when he glorifies you. But now our part of our discipleship is to walk in right behavior, which is called righteousness in Scripture. So this is why you see several people in the Scriptures that are actually called righteous, and they're in their mortal flesh. Even during the days before, during, and after Yeshua, people are called righteous because it's literally the definition of doing the instructions of God that were given to Moses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we want to put emphasis on that because even in 2020, guys, you can be considered righteous through the deeds, right? Through not only just your faith, but through your actions and how you actually go about living your life according to how the Father has instructed us to live. So we definitely want to encourage you guys to do that. If you're new to that concept, we've talked about it before, but leave comments if you want to learn more about why we even would bring up this idea of the law of Moses and attributing righteousness to that law. It's because it's the Father's behavior, and it's what he wants us as his children to do in order to show that we love him and love each other. So yes.
Yeah, it's literally Deuteronomy 6:25. The Father tells you, if you do his ordinances, statutes, and commands, you'll be considered righteous.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Okay,
so this
Sean,
I also think it's interesting, real quick, Ken. It calls this gentleman Jehoiakim. It says he's very rich. And I think that's interesting because you also have in a lot of mainstream doctrines that are taught today in churches, they'll say that because of what Jesus talked about in Matthew 19 and Luke 16 about the rich men, and then that statement, he says, well, how hard is it for the rich to enter into heaven? It's like going through the eye of the needle. And so therefore there's some wonky doctrines to get passed around, make people think that you can't have money and actually be a good person at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's just not true at all. Like Abraham had the wealth of kings, yet he was still considered righteous. This guy, Jehoiakim, also is very rich to have a spacious, garden that we're going to be reading about a little bit later. And so, but he's also diligently doing the law of Moses to the point where he's following Deuteronomy chapter 6 and actually teaching it to his children.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. And Job is a prime example too, someone who was filthy rich, lost it, and then even got more at the end. So
got double filthy rich afterwards. And the whole while he's considered righteous because he's keeping the heart and the commandments of God. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So Sean, you've got something highlighted here. I was looking around to see, was this quoted anywhere else in anything else? This idea of where the Lord had said iniquity came forth from Babylon, from elders who were judges who were supposed to govern the people. I'm interested to see, what do you think that that relevance is? Is it hearkening back to anything that else that was written?
This particular part, I just wanted to discuss just the fact that they're in Babylon. That's the setting of what this is taking place. But it says, concerning them, the Lord has said. So this actually puts this book in a unique category to where whoever's writing this book, and we actually don't get the author. It's not Susanna. Many people think it's actually Daniel, but they're actually, whoever's writing this book is saying Yahweh said something. So that's a huge claim for a book. What I'm saying? For them to actually start saying, thus saith the Lord in some of their writings. So the reason I kind of brought that up is because Judaism wants to discard this and say that it's same thing with certain Protestant denominations. They want to discard it and say, well, it's apocryphal because there's no moral teaching. It's just a story. It's just a commentary type story,
Right.
you know. But yet you got to thus saith the Lord in here, and we're going to get a lot of moral teaching actually. So it starts to reveal people's bias about how they want to discard this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we can read the next slide there if you want.
Sure, brother.
All right. So the two elders used to see her every day, going in and walking out and about, and they began to desire her. And they perverted their minds and turned away their eyes from looking to heaven or remembering righteous judgments. Both were overwhelmed with passion for her, but they did not tell each other of their distress, for they were ashamed to disclose their lustful desire to possess her. And they watched eagerly day after day to see her. They said to each other, "Let us go home, for it is mealtime." And when they went out, they parted from each other. But turning back, they met again. And when each pressed the other for the reason, they confessed their lust. And then together they arranged for a time when they could find her alone. Once, while they were watching for an opportune day, she went in as before with only 2 maids and wished to bathe in the garden, for it was very hot. All right. So we're ramping things up a little bit here.
Yeah, and this is where we basically you're getting 2 old creepy dudes.
2 voyeurs. Yeah.
Yeah. There's 2 older men, and these were the guys that were appointed judges recently, and that's going to come into play. So just remember that these are 2 older men that are now giving in, because it says at the top, they turn their eyes away from looking to heaven or remembering righteous judgments. Mm-hmm. And then it tells you how desire grew within them. And the reason I had this highlighted here, Ken, is because we actually get this same concept explained in James chapter 1, 13 through 15. It says, "Let no one say when he's tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death." Mm-hmm. And that's what the process we're about to read about, because these guys are going through this process James is explaining. And the end result, if they get their way, is going to be the death of Susanna.
Right.
And it's going to be bad. And of course, their death too, because they'll be guilty of great sin. But we also see the same concept here that they're violating, because it says they turn their eyes from righteous judgment. And they're violating just one of the, big commandments from Exodus 20, verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. So this is like right there. And that's what they're doing. This is, to me, Ken, when I was younger, I used to tell my friends, I was like, because I grew up in an atmosphere where there was a lot of churches teaching the prosperity gospel. And I used to tell some of my friends, after church, I'd be like, man, why don't these pastors teach on like other stuff like that we can apply in our everyday discipleship, like pride or coveting? Like they never teach on coveting. It's one of the 10 commandments, but here we have a situation where these elders who are supposed to be righteous, they're supposed to be following the commandments, but yet they're stepping into this minefield that has an escalating path towards destruction of coveting their neighbor's wife to the point where it's leading into sin growing. And so that's, yeah. And then of course, this is what we see in Matthew 5, 27 through 28 as well. Jesus is talking about, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I say that everyone who looks with woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This is exactly what we're seeing with these old dudes.
Exactly. And, as it was mentioned back in verse 5, in that year, there was 2 elders from the people who they just appointed as judges. They've had positions of authority quite some time, right? If you're an elder, that's an authoritative position within your community. And if the community is doing things correctly, they're going to be appointing from a good pool of people who, we would hope be keeping the law of God and would have a good reputation and all that stuff, right? So if you're going to become a judge, that's a prestigious position to have within that land. So it's just sad because we're going to see these guys completely abuse their power throughout the rest of the narrative. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it seems to be a consistent thing throughout Israel's history, is that people getting these positions of power and then abusing it. And the Father already instructing many centuries earlier about, if you're, a judge, if you're this person, if you're that, make sure you hold to the standard that I have for someone who sits in such a position of authority, because you're going to be judged greater, essentially.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we have a comment. David Shears is saying that he's pointing out verse 12 that they had watched diligently from day to day to see her. So I mean, these dudes this is escalating to the point where these two guys are just stalking her.
Well, and it's not to laugh, because it's a pretty serious situation, but it just shows the depravity of the male mind once it allows lust to conceive in your mind, right? And they were like, okay, guy, it was a good day. I'm gonna go home and eat now. Okay, me too. See ya. And then just to see them circle back and be like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? It's like, it's just so sad.
Yeah, man. This is like, it's like two old guys running each other at the entrance to the strip club, and they're like, oh, wait. It reminds me of that old joke. And this isn't about lust, but this is more about alcohol. But it reminds me of that old joke that I used to, I've heard people say about how do you tell the difference between a Methodist and a Baptist? That at least the Methodist will say hi to you at the liquor store. So it's like
the closet Baptist drinkers. Yeah.
It's just funny. Like these two dudes are creeping on this lady, and they run into each other while they're both creeping on her. And then they have to, then they decide, oh, it's like, we'll do this together and form this plot. And this is what we're about to read about. And it actually reminds me of the Watchers from before the flood, that they bind themselves together in this oath, knowing that they were sinning. You know?
It's very reminiscent of that too. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me see here. Oh, and then I just wanted to put it last year, because you and I just read this recently as we were studying scripture together. This is also what we're seeing right here as well. These guys are violating the Torah. In Jubilees 20 verse 4, if any woman or maid committed fornication amongst you, burn her with fire, and let them not commit fornication with her after their eyes and their hearts. And this is so the wording of it is very quick. It quickly changes from talking about women to men, because it then says, and let them not commit fornication with her after their eyes and their hearts, meaning they're looking at women with lust. So the first part of the sentence is talking about a woman. The second part directly starts talking about how men view women. And then I just think it's interesting, because this is what Matthew 5:27-28 Yeshua is referring to as well, as not just committing the act of adultery, but letting it fester and grow in your eyes and your heart. And this is what Jubilees is mentioned as well. So.
Right. Yeah. And so that wouldn't be a new concept, right? Yeshua teaching that. And this is my kudos to my beautiful wife, Jessica. She came across this as we were going through this chapter and discovered that, hey, look at, like, it even says not to commit fornication with your eyes and with your heart. So it wasn't just like the old way was only with your eyes, and then Yeshua introduced this new. Now it's, if you lust upon a woman, then you're committing adultery with her in your heart, type thing too, which he cares about as well. So it's not a new concept. He's always cared about the heart. And so my sweetie pie picked that out. Thank you, Jessica.
All right. You want me to take the second part here, the next part?
Yeah, sure.
So in verses 16-22, it goes on to say, and no one was there except the two elders who had hid themselves and were watching her. And this is when she went to go bathe. She said to her maids, bring me oil and ointments, and shut the garden doors so that I may bathe. They did as she said, and they shut the garden doors and went out by the side doors to bring what they had been commanded. And they did not see the elders, because they were hidden. And when the maids had gone out, the two elders rose and ran to her and said, look, the garden doors are shut, no one sees us, and we're in love with you. So give your consent and lie with us. And if you refuse, we will testify against you that a young man was with you. And this was why you sent your maids away. Susanna sighed deeply and said, I am hemmed in on every side. For if I do this thing, it is death for me. If I do not, I shall not escape your hands. It's so sad.
Yeah, she's unfortunately caught in a sad pickle. Yeah.
Yeah, this is
a lose-lose here for her, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is just straight up dastardly. My thing is, like, I mean, at the very beginning of this book, it says that Jehoiakim owned a spacious garden. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's like 3 acres, 5 acres, 50 acres. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't exactly know what that means, but it's spacious enough, I guess, so that these two dudes can hide. She can come into another part of the garden and go to a pool area where she's going to bathe, and they just trust that no one else is in there, even though the beginning of this chapter said that these people show up at their house every day to decide these legal matters. You know, there's like traffic to her house, and then it says when they all left at noontime, then she would go walking in this garden. And so I think that's maybe she was just thinking nobody would be in there because they usually never are. And so these two creepers are in there because that's what creepers do.
Yeah, they were picking up on her patterns, and they
Yeah.
obviously were familiar with the landscape and where they could successfully hide and be voyeurs. And that's what we see kind of playing out here exactly. You know, what's sad here is, like, I mean, even if it was with one guy coming up saying, "I'm in love with you," like, you're gonna lie with me, or I'm gonna make fabricate a lie here. You got two guys coming, and that's just so sickening.
Yeah, two old dudes that want to come up to you and do some, perversion, sexual perversion, and she's a married woman, and it just puts her in a situation where it's like, if you don't do this, we're basically going to have you killed, is what they're saying to her. In case you guys aren't aware, in case you're not following in the audience, a part of the law was that this is why she sighs deeply. She's like, if I do this thing, it's death for me, and that's what I think is interesting. Why here in the highlighted area. She's like, if I do not, I shall not escape your hands, which also means death for her. So, like, to do this, even if these guys never told anybody, in her heart and her mind, she feels like it's death to her.
Right.
And I
sinning against the Father, right? Essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just slip to the next one because she keeps talking about this. In verse 23, she says, I choose not to do it and to fall into your hands, speaking about the two old creepers, the judges, rather than to sin in the sight of the Lord. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice, and the two elders shouted against her, and one of them ran and opened the garden doors. And when the household servants heard the shouting in the garden, they rushed in at the side door to see what was happened to her. And when the elders told their tale, the servants were greatly ashamed, for nothing like this had ever been said about Susanna. The next day, when the people gathered at the house of her husband Jehoiakim, the two elders came, full of their wicked plot to have Susanna put to death. They said before the people, send for Susanna, the daughter of Hilkiah, who is the wife of Jehoiakim. So they sent for her, and she came with her parents, her children, and all her kindred.
Yeah, so, I mean, the highlighted part here, I wanted to point out just obviously she's got to make a decision quick, because you got these two probably drooling Judeans over her, and they obviously have their mind made up as to which out of the options that they've given her, which one they want her to choose. Which is interesting is, the Father says in Deuteronomy 22 about a woman who's in a field essentially about to be raped. She's to cry out, right?
That's right.
Which shows that she's not consenting to this whatsoever. And so we have here Susanna crying out with a loud voice. So she's doing this, and the two elders are like, I don't know if they were expecting it or not. Probably not. I mean, they were so enamored with her and distorted in their mind as to how this would play out. So she starts screaming, and the two elders start shouting against her to try to, like, drown out her shouts, I guess. And then, I was just wondering what was going through their mind. I mean, obviously they're running to the doors, and they're like, okay, this didn't go as planned, so we got to go with this lie here.
Yeah, it reminds me of the extreme, like, political activists that just shout "re," they're just screaming "re." It's like these old dudes, they realize this is not going to go well, so they're going to have to go with their threat. They're going to have to enforce their threat to her, so they just start screaming against her, which is kind of funny. But also, you're right, brother. You're 100% right. This is what she's doing. In case the people aren't aware, she's following Torah. This is why at the beginning of the book it tells you her parents taught her the law of Moses. Yeah. So she's following Torah, and this is actually, guys, this is what's going to save her. So this is why I think this book is amazing to me. Like, this book is truly amazing, guys. Literally, the law of God is going to physically save her in her lifetime from death because of God's righteous wisdom implored to help discern and be a righteous judge, between matters. So here in Deuteronomy 22, this is the context of why she screams. In verse 23 to 27, it says, if there is a girl who's a virgin engaged to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out of the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death. The girl, because she did not cry out in the city, and the man, because he has violated his neighbor's wife. Thus, you shall purge the evil from among you. And here's the secondary situation, okay? So meaning that if the first situation just explained to us, if they're in the city, which means they're around other people, then the woman needs to cry out. But the second scenario is if they're in the field and the man finds the girl who is engaged and the man forces her and lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die, but you shall do nothing to the girl. There is no sin in the girl worthy of death. For just as a man rises against his neighbor and murders him, so it is in this case. When he found her in the field, the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her because they're in a field. They're not around other people. And so she's actually not, she's not worthy of death. So it's, I just think this is like, to me, it's like super beautiful because it protects the woman in both scenarios.
Yes, exactly. There's protection encapsulated in this scenario for the woman. And I mean, obviously the first one that you read there, both parties are complicit, which is why they would be stoned to death, right? But Susanna, in her wisdom and in her good upbringing through her parents teaching her all about the Father's law, decided she was going to scream because she was married to Jehoiakim, the man she loved, and she didn't want to be committing what she thought was going to be adultery. So yeah, 100%.
And guys, and this story only gets better, and we'll jump back into it as soon as we come back from break.
Welcome back to Honor of Kings season number 3. You were watching episode number 7. We're covering the book of Susanna. And briefly, we have a few characters here already introduced. We have Jehoiakim, Susanna, who is the wife of Jehoiakim, and we have 2 creepy old corrupt judges who have decided to, lurk in the shadows to watch this beautiful married woman taking a bath, and then they decide to engage her and offer her an option to have sex with them, or they're going to abuse their power and concoct a false scenario so that it incriminates her and causes her to essentially get killed according to the law of the Father. So we have Susanna choosing to cry out, and we're going to read what happens further on. Sean, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah. So here in verses 31 through 38, it says, Now Susanna was a woman of great refinement and beautiful in appearance. And as she was veiled, the wicked men ordered her to be unveiled, that they might feed upon her beauty. But her family and friends and all who saw her wept. Then the 2 elders stood up in the midst of the people and laid their hands upon her head. And she, weeping, looked up toward heaven, for her heart trusted in the Lord. And the elders said, As we were walking in the garden alone, this woman came in with 2 maids, shut the garden doors, and dismissed the maids. Then a young man who had been hidden, he came to her and lay with her. We were in the corner of the garden, and when we saw this wickedness, we ran to them. We saw them embracing, but we could not hold the man, for he was too strong for us, and he opened the doors and dashed out. So we seized this woman and asked her who the young man was, but she would not tell us. These things we testify. The assembly believed them, because they were elders of the people and judges, and they condemned her to death. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice and said, O eternal God, who dost discern what is secret, who art aware of all things before they come to be? You know that these men have borne false witness against me, and now I am to die. Yet I have done none of the things that they have wickedly invented against me. The Lord heard her cry, and as she was being led away to be put to death, God aroused the Holy Spirit of a young lad named Daniel.
All right. We got another character introduced here, and I just want to point out in the chat here, Sister Marcia saying, this is encouraging to stand with Yah over wickedness. Yes, absolutely, sister. And it seems to pan out quite well for Susanna in this situation, as the Father hears her crying out after this guilty verdict is communicated to the assembly that is gathered there. And Sean, it's interesting because even though these guys have brought her before, the rest of the elders and the community that they've gathered together here, they still, in their creepiness, want to get a look on her, right? They ask her to take off all her clothes. I mean, you would think, I mean, I don't know if this is something that they wanted to hopefully prove to the people, that like she would show some sort of marks or something like that, proving that she was with this young man that they've claimed that she was with. But to me, it's just they want to get a last glance at her if they can, and it's just weird because the friends and family are like weeping over this event too, and they're like, "What is going on?"
You know, Ken, I did not realize that's. You think that's what's happening? I didn't realize that's what's happening.
Possibly.
So I didn't know that if this means that she removed her clothes, but I guess that would make a lot more sense why her family would start crying.
Yeah, because she was veiled, and the wicked men order her to remove her veils, that they might feed upon her beauty. Right? Look at her naked body again. But it's so weird. Like, it's like, shouldn't that spark some sort of a thought in the other elders that were around there, being like, wait, what are you doing here? Why are you guys ordering her to, unless you're investigating and trying to prove that maybe there was something on her body that would show that another man was with her or something like that. I don't know why they would even think to do that.
Yeah, because even that, goes against the Torah, right? To not look on the nakedness of your neighbor's daughter or wife. So that would be weird. Someone in the chat saying if I was Susanna, I'd be freaked out. And then other people are actually starting to catch on, I think, so whether they've read this book or not. They're saying this can't be the first time that these corrupt judges use their power. Mm-hmm. And then Stephen Schofield is saying they did not mention why they were in the garden when they gave their testimony against Susanna. And so these are some of the thoughts that went through my mind as well when I was reading this. I was like, no, wait a minute. No one's going to ask these judges, why were you in this garden?
Yeah.
This is someone else's house. Like, and apparently it literally has, like I've tried to express in previous episodes, the word garden in Hebrew means a walled off structure. And that's what we're reading here, is that there's doors to this garden. Yep, like, this is not just an open field with some trees and then a pool. Like, this is a walled off structure. And then, like, this is under the possession and authority of Jehoiakim and his servants. And so, like, that's why the servants go in with Susanna, and so she needs to bathe. So they leave because they don't want to look on her nakedness and give her some privacy. And then they shut the doors to this place. So why the heck are you old dudes in the corner of this garden? You know what I mean? And so to me, that would have been that dude raising my hand in that trial, being like, wait a minute. But Ken, maybe that is, one of the things that's God is arousing the spirit within Daniel.
Yes, we're going to read about that, but it's so sad because, the concluding remark here by these two guys is, these things we testify. And then it says, the assembly believed them because they were elders of the people and judges, meaning they are to be trustworthy individuals, right? Like, why would you ever question what they have to say, right? They hold these positions for a reason, and it's a position that was supposed to be given by the Father, right? And validated by the Father. So, which makes this even worse. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But so we're getting to see Daniel here, and the Holy Spirit within this young lad Daniel gets aroused, and this is in response to Susanna's crying up to the Father, being like, hello, and please stay out here because these judges are about to put me to death for something I have not done. And the Father, in his loving kindness, as Marcia says, it's encouraging because when you choose to side with the Father and do things according to his eternal loving way, he will respond. And he does so in this moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me that maybe what catches Daniel's attention, I know, right? That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, maybe what catches Daniel's attention is the idea that this woman, when convicted by these corrupt judges, she's not turning to them and, shouting at them in anger and violence, but yet she still just looks to God. She still just looks to heaven and is like, God, you got to save me at this point. Like, because imagine like how many real life videos have we seen of people getting convicted and they like shout at the judge and scream at the bailiff and scream at the attorneys and turn it, like, how many times I've seen these horrible videos where people have been convicted of murder. They look over at the victim's family and just smile or laugh. as they're being dragged away and after they've been sentenced to murder. And it's just like, she's not exhibiting the behavior of someone that's guilty. She's truly acting righteous. And to me, if Daniel knew who Jehoiakim was, which clearly this seems like a tight-knit community, I'm sure he did, he would know that Daniel was a man of righteousness who taught his family the law of Moses.
Exactly.
And she used the law of Moses to cry out. And that's part of, the common knowledge of them coming to this trial the next day, because this is only like the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me here, Sean, is, Jehoiakim is present, correct? We're to assume that
it's his family.
Right. And so there is another mandate within the Torah about, if a husband suspects his wife of committing adultery, isn't he to bring her before the priests and they're to give her something to drink, and then the whole swollen belly type thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's almost like why wouldn't he have stood up and been like, wait a minute, guys, like, let's do this other option. Is this because, they're in Babylon, right? Also
they are, but there's no dust from the temple floor. But also this could just fall under the two or three witnesses and matters established, and these two old dudes are just falsely slandering her with their false testimony,
right,
saying they witnessed this when they really didn't. So
yeah, and that's you're pointing to Deuteronomy 19, right, where it says you must not convict anyone of a crime on the testimony of only one witness. The facts of the case must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So that's that's part of the Torah. That's part of the legality regarding how you are to properly convict somebody on the basis of not just one witness. It's requiring 2 to 3 witnesses, and this is something that's really important. So we have the 2 witnesses technically, right? They claim to be witnesses, but we're well aware of the fact that there can be false witnesses, which we see even in Yeshua's trial. These false witnesses coming up against him and saying things that were not true. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, 100%. This is it's not a loophole in the law, because they think they found a loophole in the law, right? But this is where God, who sees all, which is what Susanna prays, and then God moves in this passage here he heard her cry, and then he arouses the spirit within Daniel.
Yeah. Now, Sean, do you think this is this is just fun, like, questioning here, but did the father have to arouse the spirit in Daniel in order for Daniel to speak up? You think Daniel was sitting by being like keeping his mouth shut because he's a young lad and he, is he being tricked by these guys, do you think? And the father literally has to like turn something on inside of his spirit to invoke him to be like, wait a minute, something's fishy here.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like because of the way it says the Lord heard her cry, and then he, God aroused the Holy Spirit in Daniel. It feels like it's possible that just, it coalesces with the timing of everything that's happening. Now she's literally being let off to go be stoned. And so whether I don't know. Yeah, I feel like the text is saying that God does prompt him in some way, but yeah, even if the text didn't say that God prompted him and he still spoke up, that's a common thing we see in the Torah. You remember, I can't remember the passage, and if anyone in the chat remembers this passage, go ahead and put it in the chat. But Ken, do you remember the passage in the Torah where it talks about if there was a dead body found in between the cities and they didn't know who killed this person, then they were to go and make atonement so that the blood would not be upon their city and upon their area? I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah, I don't know which passage that is, but
yeah. So because they were really, really concerned about innocent blood being upon their heads as judges and rulers. And this is actually built into the Torah, so that, to me, that could be the same sense of duty and responsibility that would be supposed to be inherently in the righteous judges, as we're seeing Daniel exhibit. So,
All right, I can read on, Sean.
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so here's Daniel responding, and he cried with a loud voice, "I am innocent of the blood of this woman." All the people turned to him and said, "What is this that you have said?" Taking his stand in the midst of them, he said, "Are you such fools, you sons of Israel? Have you condemned the daughter of Israel without examination and without learning the facts? Return to the place of judgment. For these men have borne false witness against her." Then all the people returned in haste. And the elders said to him, "Come, sit among us and inform us, for God has given you that right." And Daniel said to them, separate them far from each other, and I will examine them. When they were separated from each other, he summoned one of them and said to him, you old relic of wicked days, your sins have now come home, which you have committed in the past, pronouncing unjust judgments, condemning the innocent and letting the guilty go free, though the Lord said, do not put to death an innocent and righteous person. Now then, if you really saw her, tell me this. Under what tree did you see them being intimate with each other? He answered, under a mastic tree. And Daniel said, very well, you have lied against your own head, for the angel of God has received the sentence from God and will immediately cut you in two. Then he put him aside and commanded them to bring the other. And he said to him, you offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has deceived you, and lust has perverted your heart. This is how you both have been dealing with the daughters of Israel, and they were intimate with you through fear. But a daughter of Judah would not endure your wickedness. Now then tell me, under what tree did you catch them being intimate with each other? He answered, under an evergreen oak. And Daniel said to him, very well, you also have lied against your own head, for the angel of God is waiting with his sword to saw you in two, that he may destroy you both.
It's great. It's great. So this
Finally, we get some examination going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is true justice taking place here.
This is what was supposed to have been done. And what's unique is he's examining the accusers and not just the accused.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is like, we're watching like, CSI, Criminal Investigation Unit, like way before modern police detective work. Like this is a common police tactic. You separate the people and you get different stories from them, and you can tell. Not only do you get more information about the course of the events of the crime, but you can also figure out who's lying.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, actually, Ken, I looked up a mastic tree, and this is what a mastic tree looks like. So this is both a man and a woman standing next to a mastic trees, and these are in the Middle East, and they're not very big, and most maybe 12 feet tall. They have a very unique trunk and limbs that are very twisted, and they're not straight. But this is an evergreen oak.
Quite a bit of difference in size there when you compare the two, right, Sean?
Yeah, man, you can drive a semi under these limbs. These are massive, and look at the little guy compared to the huge, massive trunk of an evergreen oak. And then you can see the road on the right-hand side picture with the beautiful shaded road of all the evergreen oaks, and you could literally drive a semi underneath those.
Mm-hmm.
These are massive trees, so these guys are just retarded. These guys did not get their story straight.
Yeah, they didn't corroborate the story that they were going to tell. Probably.
Yeah.
No. So
this is what actually trips up their story. Here's another evergreen oak, just with the size comparison of another a woman standing next to it. So, and this was actually a smaller one that I found. So these are massive trees, nothing alike, very different. And in fact, the mastic tree can it actually drips a gummy substance. And it pours out of its limbs and its trunk as well. And they actually use mastic trees for gum to make different kinds of gum and stickiness. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me that you seems like you would if you're it's not a tree that you would hide under, for one, in my opinion. So like this, like people have already asked in the chat, what's going on? Why are these two dudes? Why is no one asking these two dudes? Why are you even in this garden to begin with? Because it's her. You're literally on her. It's like you're walking in her backyard. Like, why are you hanging out in the corner of her backyard?
Mm-hmm.
And then you suddenly see her engaging with some other dude. So you claim, you're like, why are you in the backyard to begin with? And that's the part that it's like they don't even ask these dudes because it's so ludicrous to begin with. But yet Daniel seems to be the only one that's catching this. And so it prods him to slow down the prosecution. Let's do some more investigation and examination and he starts to think to himself, all right, well, what are some of the surroundings of where they claim the story took place, which is in this walled off garden? All right, there's trees in there. Well, let's just see which trees they were standing beside, because the mastics, as I showed you, I'll put it back on screen. The mastic trees, one second. These, I think you could actually hide behind these.
Yeah, you could successfully, shade yourself behind those leaves there.
Yeah, if you have a whole bunch of them in an actual grove, it might shield you enough, to hide behind them because they're kind of your height.
Yeah.
But these you can't. I mean, you could hide behind these if you wanted to, but you can't put a whole bunch of them together easily like you can the mastic trees and shade your whole body. So that means you'd have to be peeking out around the corner of these. But either way, their story doesn't corroborate, and there's no explanation of why they're in the garden to begin with. So Daniel's just trying to show some logic here to try to break down this horrible accusation. So, do you want me to read these last few verses?
Yeah. Well, before you get to that, I was just going to say I love how in verse 50, when the father stirs up in Daniel this, come on, let's question these guys, this story, right? It's not corroborating properly. The elders respond to verse 50 saying, "Come, sit among us and inform us, for God has given you that right." So Daniel's practicing his God-given right to, essentially put forth the idea of you are innocent before proven guilty, right?
Yeah.
And that's a God-given right, is to respond and to be able to examine the people who are being put in these situations in the manner that we see in the story. And it's just amazing that the Father has given all these rights to people to prove to the people that are claiming that they are guilty that they are actually innocent. And so it's just great because we have a not just a couple people here, we have a group of elders, and understanding that it is a God-given right for Daniel, one of the elders among them, who just happens to be the youngest one, probably doing what he was supposed to do and what the other ones should have been doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why at the top of this, verse 46, he cries out, "I'm innocent of the blood of this woman." And my wife actually put in the chat the chapter that I was looking for, and David Shearer has put it on screen for us. And it's January 21, says, "If anyone be found slain in the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess, it's lying in the field, and be not known who slain him, then your elders and your judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next to unto the slain man, even the elders of that city shall take a heifer which has not been wrought with, and which is not drawn in a yoke." And I think the rest of it says they basically sacrifice to make atonement for the blood, so that they are not guilty of that blood, basically. So the whole point is, that's, to me, like, it's a big deal. Daniel doesn't want to be guilty of this innocent woman's blood as he screams, right?
Right.
And supposedly he's got a lot of wisdom, obviously, but it makes me think that the other judges and elders did not, because they appointed these two corrupt judges and elders that they're dealing with as their contemporaries.
Yeah.
So it's like, here we got the younger guy, and I don't know what it means by young lad, but to me, if he's going to sit with the judges, I think according to tradition, he had to at least be 30 years old. But you could have 60-year-old men calling people a young lad,
Yeah.
like last night I was talking to a guy that hates the Bible, and he got mad at me during the course of the conversation, and he was like, "Yeah, I've forgotten more than you've ever learned," because he was calling me young.
Yeah.
But he didn't know that I'm 40. And so it's just funny that, like, this is the mindset you see sometimes from a lot of older men, is that they not only do they perfect corruption, so they'll appoint their other, their bros, they'll appoint their little buddy system to these positions of power, but then they look at the younger people as youngerness. And so it is very unique that you pointed this out. And this was what struck out to me too when I was reading this. It was like, why did they give him this opportunity to even pursue more examination like this? And it makes me wonder if what we see earlier in the book of Daniel, with how the other kings have treated Daniel, and how this could possibly be a situation. I don't know the exact timeline of when this story is taking place, but had he already had encounters with, being thrown in the lion's den with, what I'm saying? With Darius, because he refused to stop praying or whatever it was. And I just think, I wonder if, like, they'd already heard about him at this point. And so this is why they gave him this honor to do further examination.
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, I guess the Septuagint puts this as like chapter 13 in the book of Daniel, right? So if we're thinking of a chronology here, then I guess it would have been after all of that. But yeah, it's interesting to think about. And even Sean, in the law, it talks about how, and just touching on where Daniel's crying out, "I am innocent of the blood of this woman." If he hadn't cried out, then I guess him and the elders would have been guilty of the blood of the woman, right? Which is something in the law where the father says if you are silent regarding a matter and that person gets put to death and they're innocent, you're guilty of that person's blood, and you are to receive the same penalty.
That's right.
So it's a serious matter.
And someone in the chat is talking about another point that I wanted to bring up, which is I think it's kind of funny how Daniel addresses this first guy he's interrogating. He just straight out, he just comes right out. He's just like, no punches pulled. Just, you relic of wicked days. He's just cutting him right to the quick, man. He's like, your sins have now come home. His whole opening statements to this guy is like, Daniel already knows that this has been a pattern and that this guy has presided over other injustices as well, and possibly done these other things like this as well, which makes me think this is them finally getting caught and not a first time event.
Yes.
And so because he's literally saying like, your sins have now come home, which you've committed in the past, pronouncing your judgment, unjust judgments, condemning the innocent, letting the guilty go free. And it just makes these guys were so good, like with their story, trying to cover their basis in the story to not get caught and to make sure they can ensure the threat towards Susanna. It sounds like they had practiced this before,
Yeah.
How do you treat the daughters of Israel like this is what he says to the next one.
Yeah. I was just going to point that out, how he, you've been dealing with the daughters of Israel and you were being intimate with them, and, they had acquiesced to your advances because they were scared of you. Yet, the daughters of Judah wouldn't endure such wickedness that you were, positioning to them. And it's so interesting, Sean, because it's like, we're told that these two guys are from the tribe of Judah, right? At the beginning, they're Judeans. And I just couldn't help but make a quick mention to the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, where in Judah's account, he's talking about nearing the end of his book. Essentially, he goes through kind of the history of all the things that he did corruptly through his life. And one of them was just getting drunk and fornicating with women that he shouldn't have. And in verse 17, it talks about how, and he's telling his sons and future progeny of his tribe, saying, "And now I command you, my children, not to love money, nor to gaze upon the beauty of women, because for the sake of money and beauty, I was led astray to Bathsheba the Canaanite." And then he talks about how they're going to be corrupted later on. So it's just sad, because this is what we're seeing here. The definition of lusting after someone and being corrupt is what we're seeing with these two judges, who just so happen to be from the lineage of Judah.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting connection, man. Good call. So then we have, so I think man, he's definitely, Daniel's definitely, he's revealing in his interrogation with these two guys, that he had already assumed there's more to the story, is kind of what I love about this, and to the point where he hasn't they haven't even said anything yet, but he walks right up to the first dude and he calls him a relic of wicked an old relic of wicked days or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like right out the gate, he's already realized their story's off. This is not right. She's following the law, these guys. And so it seems to me there was some sort of pattern, and it reminds me of, who are those two priests that were sleeping with the women at the temple door?
Oh, those were
the sons of Eli.
Sons of Eli. Yes.
Yeah. Same concept. They were supposed to be judges in a position of authority over the people, and they were taking advantage of that with younger women. So that was hundreds of years before this, but the same scenario, I guess. So,
yeah. All right, we can pick up with the rest there. I can read on.
Go ahead, brother.
All right. Then it says, "Then all the assembly shouted loudly and blessed God, who saves those who hope in him. And they rose against the two elders, for out of their own mouths Daniel had convicted them of bearing false witness. And they did to them as they had wickedly planned to do to their neighbor. Acting in accordance with the law of Moses, they put them to death. Thus innocent blood was saved that day. And Hilkiah and his wife praised God for their daughter Susanna. And so did Joachim, her husband, and all her kindred, because nothing shameful was found in her. And from that day onward, Daniel had a great reputation among the people."
It's awesome.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Awesome.
So this parallels to what we see in the actual law of Moses. It's mentioning this is in accordance with the law of Moses. This is true. This is exactly how things are laid out and how you're to deal with people who are, putting forth a false witness. And I mean, this is a brief book, Sean, but we see very poignant parallels being made here to the law of God. We have corrupt judges, which is a history throughout Israel that unfortunately isn't in just a book like this, right? I mean, we see it in other books talking about how the judges and the priests were corrupt and they were doing things against his law, and they weren't dealing righteously and the way they should have been in their positions of authority. So I'm seeing nothing but parallels being made here. And like we said at the beginning of the broadcast, this book was originally in the Greek Septuagint. And there's no reason why we would hack this little book out and call it something other than scripture, in my opinion.
Game Genie says it's a great episode of Law and Order. It's very punny, Game Genie. I love it. Yeah, it is, because that's what we're seeing happen. Like we have on screen here, Deuteronomy 19:16-20. This is exactly what Daniel did. He's following the law of God, and it tells us that Susanna was taught the law of God, and we see these other two corrupt judges not doing the law of God, and the law of God prevails. So this is all it takes, is for people to actually do what's written down. And just for the viewer's sake, just because what we just saw, this is summed up in Deuteronomy 19:16, and this, to me, this would be the thing going through Daniel's mind, which is like, these guys didn't investigate thoroughly enough, because it says in these passages, if a malicious witness rises up against a man to accuse him of wrongdoing, then both the men who have the dispute shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who will be in the office in those days. The judges shall investigate thoroughly. And that's not what happened until Daniel made a situation out of it and told him, dramatically cries out, the blood of this innocent woman will not be on my hands. Like, what did that sound like? Because I just imagine this scene where like they're all walking away from the place of the judgment, and they're going to stone her, and this crowd of people, her family's crying, and then Daniel's just sitting down, like still thinking in his head, like Columbo or something. He's like, just one more question, and then he just shouts out, I'm not going to be guilty of this innocent woman's blood, and then everyone turns around and looks at him, and I could easily imagine that scene in a movie. But he basically enforces this Deuteronomy law, which is to investigate thoroughly to discover there is a false accusation. And then, of course, that's what becomes true. So it's just so beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I see Daniel doing, he's kind of going through the law, the book of Deuteronomy. He's going back to the book of Exodus, chapter 23, verse 7, which says, keep far from a false charge and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. So he's just playing all these laws in his mind and being like, wait a minute, no, I can't be guilty here. I can't put this innocent blood to death because I know the law. And if you brothers and sisters remember from our previous episode here on Honor at Kings, we actually found out that Daniel was from the tribe of Levi. And according to chapter 1 of Bell and the Dragon, well, I guess it's only one chapter anyways, chapter 1, verse 2 of Bell and the Dragon, in the Greek Septuagint, it talks about how Daniel was a priest. So this is serious for him, right? He needs to make sure that these two judges that have put this guilty verdict on the woman is actually legitimate, and he understands the seriousness of not invoking his God-given right to response from the elder on him. So it's just great, and it just gives Daniel that extra bit of amazingness, in my opinion, as a prophet, as a priest, as an elder, and a respected individual among his Hebraic community. And sorry, Judaism, I don't see why you would hate on someone like this. He's actually keeping the law of God, whereas you guys.
that's kind of the reason, right? Jesus is like, you guys aren't even keeping this law of God. Same thing with Paul in Galatians 6, where he's talking about the Pharisaical crowd that was trying to tell people they had to be circumcised in order to actually receive salvation. And that's what all of Galatians is addressing. And in Galatians 6, he actually tells you that those who are trying to force you to do this don't even keep the law themselves. And this is exactly what Jesus dealt with Pharisaical Judaism. They're hypocrites. So this is why they would want to hide and remove good information about Daniel, because not only was he a priest, which they don't like that stuff because Yeshua became our high priest, and they try to ignore all the stuff about the priests, but he's also keeping the law of God accurately and faithful. And so that's not something we see promoted in the Gospels by the Pharisees. So of course, in the first century, when they developed their little canon, they would want to leave this book out.
Exactly, and he also has a history of exposing false priesthoods. So you don't want to have people, cluing into the fact that you might be a false priesthood.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
you want to take some questions real quick?
Yeah, let's see what we got in the chat here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode of this brief book. We think it's a thumbs up, right, Sean? We're giving this a book
that's for sure.
a stamp of approval with regards to whether or not it's scripture. I'm going to include it into my Bible, and we'll see what you guys have to say about that. Any questions out there, just put them in all caps, please, in the chat, and we can answer a few.
Yeah, it's, and again, little books like this, they may seem, because it's just like one big chapter, and people think, oh, it may not seem important, but how much of the law did we learn through this application of the law in this story?
A lot.
A lot. Like, this was huge, and not just to the sake of like land appropriations or how to treat your animal, but this was like life and death stuff. And this dealt with not just the heart of adultery and lust, but also the application of slandering someone as a false witness. Deals with the righteous or the unrighteousness of corrupt judges who are supposed to be righteous. It deals with the actual proceedings. Like, we actually get to watch the law being played out, which, let's think about this. How many other times do we get to watch that in the Old Testament?
Not very often. Like, we get all the instruction regarding how you're to act and how things are supposed to be carried out if you're in these positions of authority, but we don't actually see too many scenarios. We do see in the New Testament whether or not these verses were included in the original Greek manuscripts or not. I know there's contention about whether or not it's legitimate scenario with Jesus and the Pharisees bringing a woman caught in adultery. That whole scenario was a false scenario that really, it
wasn't following the law.
It was, exactly. And Jesus he wasn't a technical judge. He wasn't someone that you were to bring, a woman like that to condemn anyways. And the whole thing was just fallacious from the very get-go. But we don't, to what you said, John, we don't see very many instances of a real tangible scenario where this actually plays out. And so that's why this is fascinating.
We do see a lot of stories in the Old Testament about people not following the law, and so, but I love this little story. So what you said about Jesus and the woman that's brought to him that was caught in adultery by the Pharisees, one of the things that I've always taught on my channel is that the reason why Jesus couldn't condemn her in any regard was not just because he wasn't the actual judge at that time, but also because they didn't have the man with it. That's part of the law, is that both the woman and the man caught in adultery should have been brought forward. And that's kind of the story of these two corrupt judges in the book of Susanna, is they say, well, we couldn't grab the man that she was with because he was stronger than us and he got away. So they knew enough of the law to try to twist it. And so I think that's interesting. But yet here in Jesus's day, the Pharisees that are trying to bring forward a woman without the man and not bring him to the judges, but bring forth to Jesus to cast judgment, like, they're not following the law in any regard. It's just, it's horrible, And so, this book is exciting.
Okay, so Sean, we got Kingdom Truther asking, when is Testament of Solomon coming? Time frame. Well, brother, I don't know. I don't know. There's so many books. That is a brief one as well. So I think Sean and I are liking covering as many books as we can, which is, why we've done Susanna today. We did Bell and the Dragon last week. We can bump that one up nearing the top of the list, I think, Sean. If you're game, we can cover maybe that one pretty soon. But we're not sure, brother. But it is on the list and it remains on the list. So
yeah, it is. Miss Janet's asking, she's wondering who the man was. And I don't know if you're talking about the story with Yeshua, or hopefully I didn't say something to confuse you about what we just read through the book of Susanna. There was no man in the book of Susanna. That was just part of the lie from the corrupt judges. So, but if you're asking about Matthew chapter 8, we're not told who the man was.
Yeah, the whole thing was that they lied. The men were them. It was almost them.
Right. It was almost, they wanted to be the men. Yeah. which is just, can you imagine? Like that just, it's cringe level 1000 right
Yeah.
there. Old dudes walking up to you, you're trying to take a bath, and they're like, hey, and think about their approach. Their approach I was literally laughing, studying this when I was listening to their approach. Like, oh, the doors are shut and we love you. So lie with us. And you're like, bro, you really need to work on your approach here. Like that is the worst.
Yeah.
These guys, like this shows you the depravity of their mentality. Just like they straight come up to a naked woman and are like, we love you. Like with no regard for the weirdness of any of it or the social awkwardness or obviously the unjust unrighteousness of it. But also it's two dudes. It's not just like one creeper that pops out of the bushes. These guys literally popped out of the bushes. It's not just like one creeper, but it's like two creepers that pop out and they're like, we love you. You're like, dude, just let her put her clothes on for a minute. Why don't you step away, you weirdo?
I know, and the full extent of the creepiness was that they were cool with both engaging together. I don't. That's no.
Yeah,
no.
It gets really weird, man. This is a really adult story for sure, but at the same times, man, this is I can't be encouraged. This little bitty book has encouraged me more than some other books that we already have in the canon, because it's just we literally get to watch the law being adjudicated in a beautiful way that saves someone's life and proves that Yahweh is righteous and wiser than we are. Yeah. And his law will cut through the lies and he will vindicate the righteous, so I think it's amazing book.
Yeah, I'm reminded actually of while I was studying this book and reading the story, I was reminded about the scenario with Solomon and the two women, and the one, both of them having a baby, and the one died in the middle of the night. That whole thing, like, I was just like, man, he was so wise with how he dealt with that, right? I was just like, why wasn't that implemented right away with this scenario? Yeah. But thankfully, we have the hero Daniel coming to save the day under the authority and Holy Spirit invoked nudge of the Father. So it was great.
Yeah. And even as I think you mentioned this earlier on about how the husband Jehoiakim, he didn't suggest that his wife undergo the Numbers chapter 5 test of adultery. And like we said, you got the two witnesses, so maybe the judges decided we're not even going to allow that test to happen because we're just, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think wasn't there like conception supposed to, like, if the woman was pregnant and the husband suspected her of adultery? So I don't know if that would have applied, because supposedly according to these slanderers, these liars' story, she didn't get to go through with being intimate. They scared off the guy.
Okay, yeah, I don't recall that little bit of possible context if it included someone who was pregnant with regards to that. I don't
it could be something I read about Josephus's commentary on that chapter, because I think that's what it, either way. But yeah, there's so many different ways it feels like this could have gone, but Daniel of course knew the right way because he was super wise in the law, because he's a priest and he's supposed to know the law. Like, I just think it's so fitting.
Yeah. Jason T is asking, Sean, you got on the screen. Okay. Have any interest in the Temple Scroll from Qumran? I think I started reading it last year and then I got sidetracked and I haven't gone back to it. So brother, there is interest for me. I just have exploring that scroll properly. So yes, there is interest, but I'm not sure if we would bring that up on Honor of Kings, possibly. I'd have to read it and study it first to see if it's something that we could, talk about here in this type of show. What about you, Sean?
The videos that I've watched 4 different videos supposedly reviewing this Temple Scroll, and there was some huge red flags that popped out to me, but I would have to review the scroll and study it some more before we would put together a show on it. But it's not out of the realm. I just think that it's definitely not. It's not something that people struggle with because it was never put into any canon anywhere. And so this, the general thrust of this book is that we're not afraid to address manuscripts that were not put in other canons, but most of the ones we do are trying to clear up issues because these books some of them have been put in other canons and some of them were not, and some of them were put in ours and some of them were not. So we're just trying to find a coherent clarity of like what books were available to be added to canons at certain times. And the Temple Scroll, I've never heard of anyone included in their canon. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I would think we would we'll put it. It's I would say we consider it, but we'll have to Ken and I'll have to talk about it.
Yeah, and if Brother Jason is interested in it and he's asking about whether or not we've been interested in it at all, then I'm going to give it an extra look, because Brother Jason, I love you, and I know that you're a diligent student of the word. So thanks for your question, brother.
For sure. And he's got an incredible setup for Sukkot on his Hawaiian island.
Yeah.
So I've seen your pictures you're posting, brother. It looks, I'm trying not to covet your Sukkot setup on your Hawaiian island, man. I was like, oh, that looks amazing.
He's an amazing photographer. You ever seen his?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Yeah,
for sure.
All right, brother. I think I'm not seeing any questions really in the comment section here. I mean, this book was pretty straightforward, but we hope that you guys have enjoyed this episode. And as always, please hit that like button if you were benefited at all with our dialogue tonight. If you didn't like it, hit the thumbs down. That's fine. We still love you. Please subscribe to Hang On His Words. Also, go over to Sean's channel, Kingdom and Contacts. Subscribe to him. Hit the bell for notifications on both of our channels if you want to see the new content as we release it. And Sean, brother, I enjoyed it. And I thank you so much for your diligence and your willingness to present to the fine people that are our audience books like this. And, Yah willing, we're going to continue doing this on this show, Honor of Kings.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you guys next week.